Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome to the series Mud Talks, Science Policy for Every Mudder with Paul Jerger, Class of 15. My name is Vanessa Chu, Assistant Director in the Office of Alumni and Parent Relations. We thank you for attending our last Mud Talks of the academic year, and we hope you and your family are safe and healthy during this time. This talk is being recorded and will be distributed after the event. Please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. Now, to briefly introduce our speaker, Paul Jerger graduated from MUD in 2015 and majored in physics. Currently, he is a graduate student in the Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering at the University of Chicago, where he is pursuing a PhD in quantum engineering. He studies how quantum defects in diamond crystals can be used as nanoscale sensors of electrical and magnetic phenomena. Now, I'm going to turn it over to our speaker, Paul. Paul, take it away.
Thanks very much, Vanessa. Let me share my screen. Okay, hope you can see that all right. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in tonight to hear a little bit about science policy. As the title indicates, I hope this will be a talk for everyone. I know some people may not have ever heard of science policy. Some people might be holding down careers in the field or regularly engage in policy activities. And so I hope there'll be something new for everyone to take away from this. But starting from the perspective of someone who might just be hearing about science policy from the first time, here's what I'm hoping to cover, at least at a very high level. What is science policy? Why is it relevant to you? How might you be able to get involved if you do decide that it's a direction that you're really interested in, and what resources can you take advantage of to learn more? So Vanessa, thanks for introducing me. Just to touch a little bit about where I've come from and why I'm interested in science policy. I did graduate with a degree in physics. I did research with Professor Gerbode, working on 2D colloid crystals like the one you see here, and mapping out boundaries of grains in the crystal. After graduating, I moved to the University of Chicago, and I've got a nice picture of my building here. And if you look really closely, you can't see me at all because my lab is 40 feet below ground. It's nice and dark down there, but it does have its perks because I get to play around with diamonds and lasers. I get to shoot lasers at diamonds and manipulate the quantum states of electrons that are trapped in these diamonds. About halfway through my degree here, a couple of years ago, I helped start the science policy group here at the University of Chicago, which is a graduate student organization that helps other grad students learn about science policy and prepare for science policy careers. So we've gotten to do some really exciting things like host a public panel downtown in Chicago where we invited professors and elected officials to talk about how Chicago's water supply is managed and treated and ensured that it's safe for everyone. It's such a large city and we have this great lake right next to us. We've mixed and bottled hundreds of bottles of hand sanitizer to distribute to food pantries over the last year. And we've gotten to attend some really exciting science policy conferences and hear about some of the work that's going on all across the country and in different fields. And so as a result of this, I've really started to feel that science policy is a really important aspect of whatever career I go into as a scientist after graduation. And I really think that is something that is worth sharing more directly with the Harvey Mud community. So that's what's brought me here today to give this talk. So what is science policy? It's a really broad and kind of ambiguous term, and it can mean a lot of things. Science for policy is a big part of it, which is applying scientific knowledge to social and governmental issues, things that affect everyone in this country. It also can refer in kind of the opposite ordering to policy for science, that is, how the scientific enterprise is funded and regulated and what organizations exist to support it. So I think the best way to illustrate what science policy is to explore some of the examples of it. Also to kind of give a framework to support some of this explanation, I'll mention that there are many different ways in which people engage in science policy. Some of the more common ones are advising and advocacy. Advising being technical experts working maybe for the government or contracted by the government to give their expertise, and advocates working maybe outside the government focused on a a single topic or an issue that they want to bring more attention to. Education, of course, could be for the public, explaining to them about a science policy issue and why they should care about it. Research is probably the most familiar. Certainly, scientists need to be researching all the different science policy avenues. Diplomacy is a little bit of a surprising one, but it's really important because many of the science policy issues cross international boundaries and can be avenues for governments to interact. And so having diplomats with technical training is really important. Communications and technical writing. Science is a really big, covers a lot of ground, and things can be very, very technical and hard to understand if you're not explaining them well. So having people who are able to communicate difficult concepts or abstract concepts in a really concise and easy to understand way is extremely important. And then program management is again a really broad, but just to give you a sense of the role of that some people play in science policy, that is running programs that distribute funding to scientists or that implement government objectives. So you can keep those in mind as we think about the different science policy topics. So if I polled everyone who is tuning in today about what science policy topics might come to mind, I feel pretty confident saying that number 1 and 2 would be the COVID pandemic and climate change. Probably the two topics that come first to mind. And these are both great topics to use to examine the science policy world. So just focusing a little more on the COVID pandemic, you can see how science policy has played out over the last year plus in a lot of different ways. It brings in scientists from all different disciplines and in all different capacities to help craft effective public policy to respond to the pandemic. So this ranges from identifying policy options. If you're a lawmaker who is not an expert in epidemiology, then when the whole pandemic started exploding, you're going to turn to the scientists and say, well, what can we do about this? Masks, social distancing, identifying which policy options might be effective is a really important part of the process. Funding vaccine research. You certainly want to develop a vaccine as quickly and effectively as possible, and you need people with technical training to help you determine which are the most effective and efficient ways to fund that research course. Predicting outcomes. I think this graph that I've shown here is a really good illustrator of the role of scientists in advising the policy process. So you might have scientists who are able to calculate models that say, well, if we do, if we're able to reduce daily contacts by different amounts, that's likely to have these different effects on the resulting COVID cases. And so, of course, science doesn't tell you which of these outcomes to shoot for. It just tells you what's likely to happen if it does. And that I think really captures the ideal role of scientists in the policy process, not dictating what policy does, but helping leaders decide if we do A, then B is likely to happen. And if we do C, then D is likely to happen. Communicating all of these policy decisions and the science behind it is really important as well, as is coordinating internationally, especially with the pandemic. It's really important that many countries that are interacting with each other be on the same page. And then just keeping up with research, scanning the rapid results that are coming out, collecting them together and delivering them to lawmakers in an accessible and timely format is another critical part of science policy. So all of these different roles require different experts with different specialties, and really showcases the broad role of scientists in dealing with a pandemic like this. There were some great illustrations of this in one of the preceding talks in this series, one with Professors Lily Hawkins and Shelley Miller, talking about aerosol science and COVID. And they both gave some really excellent examples of how they're engaging in science policy, whether it be training their students, doing interviews with the public, or identifying issues that are going under the radar. So one of the ones that Shelley Miller talked about, she alluded to this paper that just came out last week in Science, is identifying how our indoor ventilation engineering is really not up to par with some of our other strategies for improving public health. that is how we control airflow in buildings. There's really not as much attention paid to it as it should be. And so COVID, interacts with science policy directly in addressing the vaccine, but also so many other areas of science policy. Now, the examples talked about so far, with pandemic, these public health initiatives and climate change, really, it's easy to see how they connect to public policy. And so researchers in that area are usually pretty familiar with the science policy space, but it expands well beyond just those areas as well, really to all areas of science. So to give some more examples of that, here's a report that the US Geological Survey put out a few years ago in concert with some geologists, earth scientists, to explore a scenario in which a really massive earthquake hit the Los Angeles area and what the likely effects of it were to be. And a critical part of this was not just doing the study, but in communicating it to business leaders in the area, to elected officials and the public, and helping everyone to understand what the likely effects would be of this rare but devastating event. And so Dr. Lucy Jones, one of the scientists in this report, gave a really excellent talk to AAAS a few years ago on the process of communicating this science as well. A couple of more examples, really briefly. The Census Bureau has statisticians and data scientists who help them aggregate all of the data that they collect. And being the Census Bureau, the purpose is to share this with the public. But they have a trade-off to make between data privacy and accuracy. They want to report accurate data, but it's important that you not be able to identify individuals through the records that they put out. So this requires some actual, active mathematical research in what kinds of algorithms and understanding of databases that you need in order to navigate this trade-off here. And then nuclear energy and nuclear science also is inextricably linked to science policy after the development of nuclear weapons. So we're interested in pursuing nuclear energy as a low carbon energy source, but we want to make sure that it isn't used to develop nuclear weapons, and we want to reduce the amount of nuclear weapons that are currently in existence. So this is a complete, science diplomacy and a science policy topic. How do we manage all of these factors? And we need scientific experts to come in and help evaluate different risks and possibilities. To give a couple of examples of the reverse, that policy for science, I've got a quick look at a previous year's funding request for federal R&D sources. And you can see just from this pie chart here that there are over a dozen agencies which fund research and development in the federal government. And they all have different budgets with different goals. And so it's clear that it's really not a simple picture of how is science funded and to what ends in the US. So it really requires scientists with an understanding of what's going on broadly in science and also in the policy world to help agencies craft effective budgets to reach their goals. As well as funding, policy for science encompasses things like diverse and inclusive efforts to ensure that everyone who wants to participate in science, everyone who wants to be a scientist can do so effectively and safely. To talk a little bit more about why scientists are needed in the federal government, I've got a couple of quick hits of data here showing scientists in the federal and state governments. So this is a short list of the United States representatives who hold doctorates in scientific fields, and you can see it is a short list. Only 6 of them in the U.S. House and none in the Senate. At the state level, the picture looks pretty similar. There are a few percent of healthcare professionals and a lot fewer scientists and engineers. So on a state-to-state basis, there's usually only a couple who are in the legislature who have any sort of scientific background. Now, this isn't in itself a problem. We want our lawmakers to craft laws, and so it does make sense that most of them are coming from law backgrounds or political science backgrounds. But it's important when we come to topics that are science related that they get really good consultation from scientists and really good advising to ensure that they're able to craft effective legislation. So some of you might recall a few years ago when Facebook was called upon to testify about user privacy and their business model. There was a little bit of attention paid to some of the questions asked by the senators, which it seemed like they really didn't have a firm grasp around the tech world and how Facebook operates. And of course, while it'd be great to have 100 senators who all are experts in tech policy, I think it also reflects on the quality of the advising that they're getting. So if you have effective scientists in government able to provide good summaries of the tech industry or a science policy issue, then it's much easier for the senators who are making decisions to be able to do so effectively. And when you really boil down to it, science is a political endeavor. Research money is appropriated usually for specific aims, like whether it's medical research or alternative energy sources. There are political goals to investing in science. And as with any other federal funding allocation, it's important that scientists have advocates and those who understand both science and the policy world able to mediate that process and advocate for the interests of the entire scientific industry and of scientists individually. So I'm here because I really think that Harvey Mudd students and alumni are really well suited to engage in science policy, whether it's as a career or as a volunteer. And to give a couple of reasons for this, first of all is the Harvey Mudd mission. I was really connected with the mission when I was a student at Harvey Mudd. This goal of educating scientists and engineers who understand their impact on society and who are aiming to become leaders in their field could almost work as an alternative definition for science policy. The Mudders I know are also really experts in their fields. Mudders like to get really good at what they do and explore their fields deeply. But in addition to that expertise, the Harvey Mudd curriculum and by nature it's an interdisciplinary school. So by virtue of going through the core of doing interdisciplinary projects, Mudders are really good at talking across disciplinary boundaries. And from the examples that we've talked about already, I think it's clear that science policy issues are usually highly interdisciplinary. There are a lot of different fields that are needed to address complex issues. And being able to communicate across those field and technical, non-technical boundaries is absolutely essential. And then lastly, there's the community. The science policy world is a really relationship-driven area where it matters who you're able to get in touch with and who's willing to help you out. And the Harvey Mudd community is a really supportive one. And I think that that network is one that really works to an advantage for any Mudders who are in science policy. So at this point, if maybe you're new to the idea of science policy, or you're thinking that it's something that you'd like to engage in more, you might also be thinking that, I'm not that familiar with the policy world. I really don't want to become an expert in policy. Or maybe you just feel like you don't have enough experience in your own field even to be an expert. Well, the good news is that there are opportunities for everyone to contribute to science policy, that really everyone's skills and abilities are needed. From the examples I discussed, all fields of STEM are really important, from engineering to climate science to physics. There are a lot of different ways, which I'll get into in just a little bit, to engage with different amounts of time. You could be working in a science policy career, doing it full time, or you could be a professor, engaging in addition to the work you do in the classroom and your research. You could just be a retired individual and wanting to engage with some of your free time. So there are opportunities to engage with all of this. And just because, whether you feel like you're an expert or not, by the time you've graduated from Mudd, you are more of an expert in STEM than most of the people who are working in the government. So your expertise, your familiarity with science is already important. And some of the skills that you learn along the way, whether it's data science, communication, are also valuable. As well as just the ability to offer your time. The policy world is really fast moving, and there isn't a lot of time to learn everything to the depth that you want. So when volunteers come in and offer their abilities, that's really important. All right, so avenues that you can get involved in science policy. These can depend on whether you have an hour or an entire lifetime. There are a lot of different ways that you could get engaged. And so I'll try and give a selection of different avenues to go, and hopefully one of them will resonate with you. So say you've only got an hour. Even an hour is a lot to enables you to do some things that can have an impact or get you started in a new direction. Certainly enough time to learn about an issue, whether it's reading news articles, watching a webinar, or starting to look through some of the primary literature. An hour is definitely enough time to vote or to register to vote. You can sign up for science policy news updates, and there are a few sources here which I can list. The American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, has a couple of newsletters to sign up for. And the American Institute for Physics, AIP, has an FYI newsletter, which is one that I personally subscribe to, and they have some great little summaries of what's current in science policy. You can also look up your elected officials, see who represents you. And if you already know them, an hour is enough time to get in touch with them. Most offices now have email or social media that you can use to connect with them. But of course, even now, the most effective way to have your interest heard by the office is to call and talk to a staffer. Depending on where you study or work, your organization might have a government relations office, and so you can get in touch with them and see what issues that they're paying attention to and if they could use your help in any way. If you're a member of a professional society, these societies are usually pretty well connected to the policy world and definitely have government relations staff. So they probably have put together a set of science policy resources related to your field that can help get you started. And lastly, if you're on Twitter, you can follow science policy Twitter accounts. So these might be federal agencies, they might be individuals, scientists who are really engaged in science policy, and this is usually this usually expands naturally as the people you follow refer you to other great science policy accounts to follow. All right, so say you've got a day. One thing that you can do in a day is to offer public comments. So at regulations.gov, all federal agencies have to request public comment if they're proposing a new rule or regulation. And so they'll have, here's an example of a proposed rule from the EPA that's open right now. You can go to this website and submit a comment, basically your informed opinion on their new proposed rule. And by law, these agencies have to respond to all the unique and substantive comments that they get. So this is a way that you can really directly provide input to the agencies and their activities. You can visit your member of Congress in a day. You might be able to do this in person on your own, but professional societies, again, are a great way to get involved. So this was something that I did last year virtually, was to connect with my local representatives. And the professional societies are really happy to have constituents talk to legislators. And so you can go in, and this is a great way to make your case for why certain bills or certain issues should be a priority for their office. You can learn about the budget in a day. You certainly can't learn all about the budget in a day, but a day is about enough time to get you started understanding where funding comes from, the funding process on a year-to-year basis. And again, AIP has a really nice tool that'll help you learn about how the budget works and what's going on in science funding right now. You can edit Wikipedia articles. This might seem like an unusual way to affect science policy, but there are a lot of policy-related science articles on Wikipedia. As an example, one of my fellow students in the science policy group made some really important contributions to the algal bloom article on Wikipedia. And since she did that, it's been viewed over 100,000 times. So you can have a surprising impact by improving or adding articles to Wikipedia. You could join a march or rally for an issue that you really support. or you could attend a workshop to help build science communication or science policy skills. AAAS, again, is an organization that regularly hosts these workshops, in addition to many others. And coming up next month, they have another workshop on communicating science and engaging with the public. A week. Now, if you have a week, you can definitely write a letter to the editor or an op-ed in a newspaper or an online publication. So this is an opinion article, supported by evidence, where you get to make an argument about a policy or, not just a policy, really anything that you're interested in, but it could be a science policy issue. And so again, I had a fellow student in the science policy group write an issue about digital privacy and submit it to a local newspaper. You could attend a science policy conference. The biggest one each year is the AAAS annual meeting, which takes place in February. And this is a huge conference of about 10,000 different scientists and science policy professionals and science educators all coming together to share the ways that they're engaging in science policy. For more early career students and researchers, there's the National Science Policy Symposium. And I'll say a little bit more about the National Science Policy Network in a bit. But that one's more in October, coming up in the fall, and is another really great way to introduce yourself to science policy. If you're so inclined, you can also give a talk at these conferences. It's usually pretty easy to submit an abstract and end up as a speaker. You might be able to plan a visit for your elected officials. Maybe now is not the right time, but depending on if you're at a university or certain organizations, elected officials might be interested in coming to see what research you have going on, or what your organization is up to, and this is a great way to get face time with them. A week is enough time to read a book, for sure. It could be a book just to more generally introduce yourself to science policy or science communication. And one book I can recommend in this space is Escape from the Ivory Tower, which is written for scientists and it intends to show how you might do well in communicating with journalists or elected officials. Basically, how do you get outside the technical jargon of academia or research and communicate effectively outside your discipline? Or it could be a book that's more specific to your area of expertise and that'll help introduce you to the policy that's going on surrounding your research area. A week's also a good amount of time to write a policy memo. So a policy memo is a short document which summarizes options for a policy change at the state, federal, or local level, and makes a recommendation. And this is a really common form of communication in the policy world. This is also something that my fellow science policy group students have done. 3 of my colleagues put together a memo on a policy recommendation for preserving the Great Lakes in the face of climate change. And they were able to get that published. It was a really neat article, and I learned a lot from their process of putting that together. A year. So with a year, we're really starting to talk about long periods of time and some serious investment. So with a year, you could apply for and do a fellowship or an internship in science policy. You could start or advise a science policy group. You could teach or take a course on science policy, serve on an advisory board for a nonprofit or a government organization, or you can run for public office. I think it might be worth delving into some of these a little bit more. So we'll start with the internships and fellowships. The big one for scientists, those with PhDs or equivalent, is the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships. So this is a rapidly growing program that's been going on for decades, but is really picking up steam lately. That for a 1 or 2 year term places scientists in either a federal agency or in a legislative office or a congressional committee, and they help out in a technical capacity in providing recommendations, or it really depends on where exactly you're placed, but you get to bring your scientific expertise into the government in order to improve the policymaking process. And in the course of the fellowship, you get to meet a lot of people, you learn a ton about how the government works, and it really sets you up for success in the policy world afterwards. This program was so successful that California emulated it. The California Council on Science and Technology set up a state-level fellowship program. This also is for PhDs or equivalent. In both cases, with the AAAS and the CCST fellowship, you don't need to have just graduated. This could be later in your career. You just have to have an interest in the policy world and in getting experience in it. And so following the CCST model, many other states have started setting up science policy fellowships for their state governments. I think the number's getting up to close to 10 or 12 states at this point. And certain larger metropolitan areas also have policy fellowships, although they may or may not be science specific. For undergraduates, there's many internship opportunities, and I'll be able to share a list of some of them in the follow-up to this talk. But one of them that I mentioned just because it's coming up soon is the Virtual Student Federal Service. So this is an internship program that takes place during the academic year and looks for part-time, about 10 hours per week commitment to help out a federal agency that requests an intern. You might be surprised that this program exists, a virtual internship program in the federal government. It's impressive that they were able to stand that up in the last year. Well, the secret is that it was actually around a lot longer than that. There's been a virtual internship program in the federal government for quite a long time. And here's one example of a posting here from the Department of State, where they're looking for an intern to do some research and analysis on policy in the Pacific. So not all of their internships are science policy internships, but you can search through them, and July is the application period for that. I'll also point towards the National Science Policy Network, which is targeted for early career scientists, those who are undergraduate, graduate, or recent graduates. Although they do have affiliate members and are looking to connect their members to people outside of early research stages. And this is basically an umbrella network which connects science policy groups, kind of like the one that I'm in, at all different universities across the country, helps bring them together to collectively advance their science policy interests and provide professional development, whether it's funding or a conference opportunity, or they collect a really extensive set of resources on fellowships, professional societies, et cetera, that are related to the science policy sphere. So definitely would recommend anyone who's an early career scientist check this out. There are many other organizations which support scientists in engaging in policy. The Engaging Scientists and Engineers in Policy Consortium, ESEP, is another coalition which connects organizations like professional societies together to help collectively advance science policy goals. Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally is a, as the name indicates, tries to help scientists connect more with local interests and community level. They're a volunteer-run organization, and I know they're looking for volunteers right now, so that's one direction to check out. And I mentioned before that running for office is an option. It definitely sounds a little intimidating if all of you have ever done is research or work for a private company. But there are also resources to help people who are looking to make that leap. 314 Action Fund is a political action committee which their mission is to support scientists who are looking to make a difference in government and actually run for office. As you can see from their self-described blurb here, they're definitely on one side of the political spectrum, but they can be a useful reference for everybody. And then the professional societies as well. The American Physics Society, American Chemical Society, all have career options and job boards, science policy resources that you can take advantage of. And then, what about a lifetime? Whether it's as a career or not, there's a lot of things that you can do over the course of a lifetime. You could start a science policy program. You could volunteer your time outside of your work. So AAAS has an on-call scientist program where volunteer scientists get connected with humanitarian organizations internationally to provide their technical expertise to advance the organization's mission. Communicating your science is another great way throughout your life to engage in science policy. You can identify science policy issues that are related to your research, or even just convey the basic science so that the public or whoever your audience is more able to make informed decisions when it comes to forming opinions on science policy matters. And then, of course, if you're so inclined, getting a job in science policy is a great way to engage. So that's a really big question. And one resource that I think is a good place to get started is CCST's report on science policy careers. So this is a freely available document online, and it's really easy to read. It both provides an overview of science policy organizations. What are the federal agencies that play a role? What are the state level agencies? And the different issue areas. Where is science policy typically practiced and in what manner? And it also highlights a number of different scientists who are in science policy. There are some spotlights like this that help showcase the variety of different careers that science policy professionals can take. Unlike, I would say much more so than academia, they're very heterogeneous career paths and destinations, and it can be hard a priori to know what's most suited to your interest. So looking at examples like this of people who have made a career out of science policy is a good way to learn what might be of most interest to you. And so if you're interested in finding this report, it's at the CCST website. This report also has a really cool graphic that in a tree diagram shows the kind of broad spaces of science policy careers. This is another way to help organize your thoughts and kind of consider where might you be most interested in directing your science policy efforts. This is certainly not exhaustive or comprehensive, but it is a useful reference to start thinking about what agencies or organizations you should be looking at and what sorts of roles might be there. I also wanted to highlight some of my fellow classmates in class of 2015 who are engaged in science policy. So Priya Danti was a CS math major in class of 2015 and started a nonprofit called Climate Change AI to help apply machine learning to climate science problems and engage policymakers around it. Marie Kierkegaard was a physics major and now is working for the National Academies. This photo here is a really great photo. I love this photo. She went to Moscow as part of a policy exchange. And then Tamara Savage majored in engineering and worked for the NSF for a couple of years. She's now working on an engineering and public policy degree at Carnegie Mellon. So really all majors and interests can engage in science policy as part of a career. And then also here, just to get you started are some sample job titles for people who might be working in the science policy space. One more resource that I wanted to highlight is HMC's own Office of Civic Engagement, which for anyone who's as old as I am or older, it might be a little bit unfamiliar. It's a relatively new office on campus. Those of you who are current students probably know much more about it than I do, but it helps bring together all of the different aspects of the Harvey Mudd campus that are outward facing, that engage with the community. So this ranges from student groups, some of which have been around for a long time, like Science Bus, ESW Moss, Engineers Without Borders. These are really great, both science policy, science advocacy, and science education directions. HMC's also started doing social justice clinics. So this might be unfamiliar to alumni, but it's clinic projects that that work with community partners or community organizations and have a focus on environmental or social justice or an organization with a mission in that space. And so you can check out the website for some examples of this. And there are also internship opportunities for students who might be interested in exploring public policy more over the summer. So there are a couple of fellowships which might be able to support projects in that direction. So again, I think the current students are pretty familiar with this, but also wanted to raise this to the attention of alumni to support what's going on and the programs that Office of Civic Engagement is running. And alumni might come back with projects. If you have an idea for a social justice clinic, something that your organization could really use help, is another great way to connect to our current student body. You can also reach out to Gabriella, who's the director of the office right now, for more information. They've got a lot going on. I also wanted to float two of my own suggestions. One is I'd love to see a concrete community of Harvey Mudd alumni and science policy forum. I mentioned a few of my classmates who are doing science policy. Since it's such a, there's so many directions in science policy, and it's hard to know where the opportunities are and what interesting work is going on. It really helps to have those alumni connections. I could share from a couple of years ago, I happen to know I'm a mutual connection of two alumni who are doing science policy fellowships in the federal government, but they didn't know that each other was doing the fellowship. So I was able to connect them, and these alumni networks are really important in science policy. To the current students, I would offer a suggestion of forming a club for general science policy issues. This could help everyone learn more about what science policy is, and help build skills and do other career development that helps connect you to science policy careers. And so in that direction, I will do a brief shameless plug for the alumni perspective that I am doing next week with Tamara Savage. So this is taking place next Friday. And we're going to talk about science policy issues. So if you're interested in hearing more and talking with either of us, please do show up and ask us anything you want about science policy. We're both really happy to help. I also promise Tamara will do most of the talking, so it's going to be a really good event. And yes, please reach out to Vanessa or check your email for more information about how to sign up. So that brings me to the end here. I could say an awful lot more about science policy. It's a really huge space, but just to summarize what I hope you take away from this, that science policy is the really broad term which encompasses all the different ways in which scientific research and scientists themselves shape public policy and vice versa. I believe personally that Harvey Mudd students and alumni are really well positioned to make a big impact in the world of science policy. And I always love to see and hear from Mudders who are engaged in science policy. And if you're interested but aren't currently engaging in science policy or want to engage more, there are so many different ways in which you can use your time to do something important and contribute something that not everyone can. So I presented a few here, and Vanessa will be sure to provide the full list in the follow-up materials. But if you're interested in hearing more about anything that I've talked about, you are welcome to reach out to me at my email here, or find me on LinkedIn or any other way. So thank you very much. I'm really happy to take questions now.
Thank you, Paul. So we do have some questions for you. What type of degree do you think scientists need to get involved in policy, specifically advising or working directly for the government, like a master's or PhD, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The fellowships that I mentioned are the ones that most directly put you into the government. Tend to be for PhDs, but they really don't require PhD skills. So I will be happy to share a list of fellowships opportunities for undergraduates to look into as well. It definitely depends on the kind of science policy you want to engage in. Certainly, like, for example, Marie, the position she's in as a nuclear policy program officer, it really helps to have a PhD in nuclear policy. It's a really complex field, and you really do want that technical training. But for some other matters, the policy work that you do really isn't all that technical, and just having a general research background with any degree might be enough to get you into the position that you want to.
Great, thank you. Do you have any suggested organizations for retirees interested in getting involved?
So off the top of my head, I would say that the AAAS is a great organization, although probably one that you're familiar with already. I think I'll have to get back to you on that. I'm sure there are, but I don't have too many right on the tip of my tongue.
Great, thank you. Someone did have a suggestion of planning commissioners for retirees. Our next question, so most of the funding for research and policies in the military or health with a smaller portion for energy and others. How do we fund policy that isn't directly tied to the military or healthcare industry complex?
Yeah, definitely a good question. And it's certainly surprising to see how much of the federal research budget comes from the military. Of course, that money gets used very broadly, but yeah, to your question, there are a lot of private funding sources if you want to go non-governmental. So supporting foundations that have their own specific goals for science policy, but also advocating within the federal government for those distributions of funding towards maybe the NSF, which has very different goals than the military, or for the Department of Energy. It's a really complex space, and yeah, it's an excellent question.
Great, thank you. How do we explain the issues of science to scientifically illiterate adults? So for example, adults who don't want to know what carbon dioxide is. How can we teach these adults?
Sure, yeah, it's a classic science communication problem. There are a lot of museums, science museums, but they also have they have the most success educating kids who are the most receptive to things that are just cool. I'd say from the sound of the question, I'm coming up with a scenario where you want to explain something about climate change to someone who just really isn't interested in learning about it. And I think the crux of that is like, why are they not interested in learning about it? Is it because it doesn't seem interesting to them? Is it because it doesn't seem like it impacts them? There's a kind of a formal model of science communication called the deficit model, which kind of puts scientists as the keepers of knowledge, and they're trying to distribute it to other people. But that generally isn't how people learn effectively. A more effective way of teaching people is to start from, well, what are their values and what are their interests? And how can I make this information relevant to them in a way that that they do want to engage with? So I think that's where many museums currently and science communicators currently try and take that tack of, can I speak to your values first and lead you towards the scientific information that I want you to hear, that I think is important for you to hear.
Great, thank you. We do have one more pre-submitted question, but if you have any other questions, please feel free to submit in the Q&A. Have you read Sarwitz's book, Frontiers of Illusion? And if so, any comments with regard to key points made there?
Yeah, so I'm familiar with the book. I haven't read parts of it recently, but as I understand, it's intending to point our focus towards the goals and the mission of science funding, that is the more policy for science, and saying that what are our goals really, and is science accomplishing those goals? And in general, I really support those ideas. As scientists, we like to see policies that are based on evidence, and there's no reason why we shouldn't turn that lens back on science itself. Science should be able to justify its own endeavors, and so yes, I'm not as familiar as I'd like to be, but I think it's an excellent book.
Great, thank you. We do have other people who do agree with you. The book is excellent. What was your personal experience in science policy prior to forming the science policy group at U Chicago?
Oh, yeah, very little at all. At the start of it, that was really my entrance into science policy. I wasn't familiar with science policy at all, and I fortunately had the help of many other grad students, one of whom had previously been in a science policy group at his previous university. And so he was able to bring in, the rough outline of what a science policy group looked like and, what activities you can engage in. And fortunately, there are a lot of resources out there to help students who want to start science policy groups and learn more. So the National Science Policy Network, which we're now a chapter of, has been great at helping us connect to those resources and learn more ourselves. So it's been a learning process all along the way, and starting a science policy group is the best way to learn.
Great, thank you. What are common job titles to look for in science policy careers?
It again, I think, depends on what you're interested in doing. There are more research-focused science policy careers, and those might still just be called a researcher or scientist or engineer. I would direct you back to that science policy career tree to look at the different branches of science policy and start looking through maybe what some of the organizations that employ science policy professionals have available. There are legislative assistants, there are consultants, there are U.S. representatives and senators. Maybe not an entry-level job title, but one to work towards.
Great, thank you. So I have a question for you. What are you currently doing, outside of your current work and everything to help with science policy?
Sure, and thanks for asking. I have definitely been engaging a lot with the science policy group. So I mentioned a couple of our projects. We've been applying for grants from funding agencies to do science policy activities. So one of the ones that we held in this spring is a workshop on building inclusive organizations, STEM organizations, and so that was one of our projects. Also, we've been doing a lot of work to support food pantries, not just with the hand sanitizer, but also with filling some of their needs in terms of food and masks. So that's been a lot of work, but very fun, as well as doing engagement for science education. So working with the Museum of Science and Industry here to help create educational materials and help explain what I do and what other scientists do to the general public.
Great, thank you so much. So my final question for you is, do you have any advice or final remarks to current students and alumni who want to get into this, change policies and all? Yeah,
I would definitely like to see the Harvey Mudd community come together for specifically a science policy group, and have alumni get in touch with each other and reach out to the undergraduates about what work they're doing and how they might get involved, because from what I hear from people who are in science policy careers, they really kind of go pinballing around the space, and there are so many different organizations, and people just hear about a cool opportunity and get involved with it. So I would encourage the current students to reach out to the alumni, which is something that I've really benefited from, and for the alumni who want to share their science policy careers with the current students to make an effort to get back in touch.
Great, thank you. I want to thank Paul for joining us today and for sharing your knowledge and insights with us. Thank you to our audience for your questions and for attending this event. We will follow up within next week with recorded video and presentation materials, which will include all the different links that Paul talked about. This concludes our Mud Talk series for the academic year. We may have a few in the summer, but we will officially start back up in September. We are currently looking for speakers, so if you are interested in being a Mud Talk speaker, please contact us at alumni@hmc.edu. Future events can be found on our online offerings page using the link included in your confirmation email or by visiting alumni.hmc.edu and clicking on online offerings. Thanks again for joining us tonight and have a great night, everyone. See you soon.